The courtroom was too quiet, the kind of silence that made your pulse sound louder in your ears. Every seat was filled, but no one dared to move. They sat frozen in the polished wooden pews, watching a man unravel in real time. Detective Michael Reyes sat at the defense table, his hands resting flat, knuckles pale. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared ahead, jaw tight, eyes locked on the judge's bench. The air tasted like varnish and old paper, thick with tension and something worse, finality. This wasn't the beginning of something. This was the end. Beside him, Titan sat like a statue, unmoving, his dark eyes scanning the room with silent calculation. The German Shepherd's ears twitched, picking up sounds no one else could hear. The nervous rustle of fabric, the soft clink of handcuffs carried by the bailiffs, the faint click of the judge's pen tapping once, twice, against the mahogany bench. Titan didn't make a sound, but his presence was louder than anything in the room. He wasn't just a dog, not to Michael. He had been his partner through raids, shootouts, and nights when backup was too far to matter. They had cleared buildings together, tracked fugitives through dark woods, and once barely escaped an IED and a warehouse sting gone wrong. Titan had taken a shard of metal in his flank that day and still stayed on his feet. But here now, all he could do was sit. Michael breathed in through his nose, slowly, deliberately. The charges read like a bad dream. Evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, intent to mislead an active investigation. He had denied it from the start, refused the plea deal. He wouldn't admit to something he didn't do. But the prosecution had painted a clean, damning picture. A planted file here, a missing witness statement there. The kind of details that stacked like bricks until the weight crushed you. The courtroom didn't care that he had spent 15 years protecting the same streets, now pretending not to know him. The jury didn't see Titan's loyalty or the sleepless nights that came after a child was saved or a victim got justice. They only saw the photos, the exhibits, the implication. Across the aisle, the prosecutor sat straight-backed, his expression unreadable, though his lips twitched like he'd already rehearsed his press statement. Lyle Grant, sharp-suited and cleaner than his arguments. He hadn't looked at Titan once. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Will the defendant please rise?" Michael stood slowly, his knees locking. Titan rose beside him, mirroring the motion without a command. It wasn't training, it was instinct. The judge's eyes swept the room, and for a moment he hesitated. It was the smallest pause, but Michael felt it. Maybe it was Titan, maybe it was doubt, but the words still came. In the matter of the state versus Detective Michael Reyes, this court finds the defendant. Michael's ears rang. Time bent around him. He didn't hear the word right away, only saw the subtle movement of the judge's lips. Heard the sound escape from someone behind him, a soft gasp, like a balloon deflating. "Guilty!" Titan didn't move. Michael didn't either. But inside, something cracked. The bailiff stepped forward. His hand hovered near his belt, unsure if force would be needed. It wouldn't. Michael didn't resist. What would be the point? He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Titan. The dog's gaze was steady, unbroken, as if waiting for a command that wouldn't come. Michael swallowed against the tightness in his throat. His voice barely made it past his lips. "I'm sorry, buddy." Titan blinked slowly. He didn't whine, didn't cower, just stayed rooted beside him, silent and loyal as ever. The judge began outlining sentencing protocol, but Michael barely heard a word. His vision tunneled. He wasn't thinking about prison or court appeals or how fast the media would twist his story. All he could think about was what this meant for Titan. They would separate them, and Titan wouldn't understand why. The leash in his hand suddenly felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried, and as the gavel struck the bench with a final, echoing crack, Michael knew this wasn't just the end of his career. It was the severing of a bond no one else in the room could see. But Titan felt it. That much was certain. And what neither of them knew yet was that this moment, the silence, the fracture, the injustice, was only the start of something far greater. The chain clinked softly around Michael's wrists, not yet locked but threatening. The bailiff stood close, silent and stone-faced, waiting for the final nod. Protocol was procedure now. Dignity wasn't part of it. But before the cuffs were fastened, Michael turned his head toward the bench, his voice barely cutting through the heavy quiet. "Your Honor," he said, "just a minute before I go, one last moment, with him." He didn't gesture. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who him was. The judge hesitated, his gavel still resting in his palm. His eyes dropped to the German Shepherd, sitting calmly at Michael's side, and for a long breath, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. "Make it brief." Michael exhaled, shoulders loosening with a quiet motion. The bailiff stepped back half a pace, enough to give them room. The courtroom didn't move. No one stirred, as if even the wood of the benches held its breath. Michael turned to Titan and sank slowly to one knee. He was careful, almost reverent, like someone approaching something sacred. His fingers slipped under the edge of the K9's collar, and for a moment, nothing else existed. The courtroom, the judge, the spectators, all faded. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, leaning forward until his forehead touched Titan's. "I'm going to be gone a while, but it's not your fault. You didn't let me down. Never did." Titan didn't lick him, didn't move, but his body leaned in, the way he used to during stakeouts, when Michael's breathing would change and Titan would quietly press close. The kind of bond born not from orders, but from surviving something together. But then, just as Michael pulled back to meet his partner's eyes, Titan shifted, his muscles tensed beneath the soft bristle of his fur. Not with fear, but with purpose. His ears twitched sharply, head turning slightly toward the front of the courtroom. And then a sound, barely audible, rumbled from his throat. A growl, low, controlled. Not a threat, a signal. Michael froze. He knew that sound. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear. It was instinct, sharpened by years in the field, in places where hesitation got people killed. That sound had saved lives. That growl had warned him of ambushes, explosives, hidden threats that eyes couldn't catch but noses never missed. Titan's body became rigid, his head tilting forward, eyes locked on something across the aisle. The growl deepened, not louder but firmer, intentional. Michael followed his gaze. At first he didn't see it. The prosecution table sat undisturbed, files stacked neatly, chairs pushed in. Lyle Grant sat reviewing something on a yellow legal pad, his posture loose, casual, too casual. A thin sheen of sweat glinted across his forehead despite the air-conditioned room. Titan's gaze didn't waver. "Titan," Michael said softly, fingers still curled under the dog's collar. "What is it?" But he knew. Something had changed. The moment had shifted. This wasn't just a goodbye anymore. Titan's instincts had flared into something more. Something wrong. Michael straightened, his heart beginning to pound in a rhythm he hadn't felt since the last time they breached a warehouse together. That rhythm of uncertainty, right before everything exploded. Titan didn't bark. Not yet. But the sound in his chest kept coming, low and steady, like a distant drumbeat. His eyes narrowed. He stepped forward slightly, as if deciding whether or not to move. Michael reached out and gently gripped the dog's harness, not to hold him back, but to anchor himself. The judge noticed the change. "Is there a problem, Detective Reyes?" Michael didn't answer right away. His voice was caught between respect for the bench and the alarm crawling up the back of his neck. "I don't know," he said, slowly rising to his feet. "But he does." Titan's growl turned into something sharper, a breath away from a bark. His gaze locked on the side of the prosecution desk. There was something there, something no one had noticed, something he had. Grant shifted in his chair, eyes flicking up, just for a second. That's when Titan barked. One sharp, controlled explosion of sound. The courtroom jumped. The judge sat back. The bailiffs moved forward. Michael didn't flinch, because he had seen it in Titan's eyes. This wasn't over, not even close. The leash slipped from Michael's hand before he even realized it. 1 second, Titan was pressed against his side, all focused muscle and tension. The next, he was gone, darting forward like a shot. A bark tore through the courtroom, loud and sharp, echoing off the high paneled walls like a warning flare. Gasps erupted. A woman in the second row yelped and clutched her purse to her chest. Someone dropped a coffee cup, ceramics shattering across the floor. The bailiffs moved instantly, their training kicking in before thought could catch up. Hands went to belts. Shouts rang out. But Titan didn't care. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't wild. He was purposeful. Straight to the prosecution's table he went, no detours, no hesitation, and came to a halt beside a black leather briefcase resting just behind Lau Grant's chair. That was where he stopped. No teeth, no lunges. Just bark after bark, relentless and urgent. His stance low and locked. A sentinel, a warning. Everyone froze. Grant whipped around, his face caught somewhere between anger and confusion. "Get that dog under control," he barked, voice climbing in pitch. "This is a courtroom." But Titan didn't stop. Another bark, then another, each one more insistent than the last. Michael stood frozen by the defense table, heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to break free. He knew that sound, not aggression. Alert. Titan had gone into detection mode, that deep-chested bark that came only when something didn't belong, when he found a scent that matched danger, or a memory. One of the bailiffs reached for Titan, hand outstretched, like you might approach a wounded animal. "Easy, buddy," he muttered. "Easy." Titan didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on the bag. Judge Hallstrom stood, his hand hovering over the gavel, but not slamming it. Not yet. "Mr. Grant, what's in that case?" Grant scoffed, straightening his tie. "It's my bag, Your Honor. Just personal files, notes from the trial, administrative prep." He gave a short, practiced smile. "I can assure you, the dog's mistaken." Titan barked again, loud and jarring, like a gavel made of sound. He took a step closer to the bag, his nose nearly pressed against the leather. Michael took a step forward, raising his voice over the noise. "Your Honor, let him work." "What?" the judge asked, his brows knit in confusion. "He's trained to alert when he detects something he's been exposed to before. Evidence, residue, hidden objects," Michael said. "That's not random barking. That's a find." The courtroom whispered and stirred, unsure of where to look. A reporter scribbled furiously from the second bench. One of the jurors stared at Titan with wide eyes, mouth slightly open. And Grant, he went still. Too still. The color in his face shifted subtly, like something tightening behind the mask. "Mr. Grant," the judge said, voice low, dangerous. "Step aside from your bag." Grant hesitated just for a second. Titan didn't. He let out one final piercing bark, then lunged. Not at Grant, but at the bag itself. In a flash of motion, his teeth tore into the side pocket's zipper, yanking it open. Papers spilled. A pen rolled out and clinked to the floor. But something else, something smaller, metallic, skittered across the tile and came to a rest near the leg of the bench. A USB drive. No one moved. Titan stepped back, ears forward, tail still, and sat. Calm now, like a soldier completing a task. Michael didn't breathe. Neither did anyone else. The judge broke the silence. "Bailiff, retrieve that." One of the officers moved slowly, almost reverently, and picked up the small device. He held it up for the room to see. "A USB, he said quietly. Grant cleared his throat. I told you, just notes. Likely a backup file. I keep court materials organized digitally." The judge stared at him. "You failed to disclose digital storage." "It's nothing, I assure you." But even as he said it, his voice cracked at the edge. Titan hadn't moved, still seated, ears pointed, eyes locked on the bag. Michael stepped forward again, softly this time. That's not how he reacts to nothing. The judge looked at the bailiff, then at the court clerk. "Secure the drive. We'll examine its contents immediately." More gasps. Murmurs rippled through the benches like wind through dry grass. Grant's hand curled into a fist at his side. Titan didn't need to say anything else. He already had. The courtroom had turned into something different now. Not a place of law, not quite yet a stage for justice. More like a bomb shelter holding its breath, waiting for the next sound. And it came in the form of fabric tearing. Titan yanked hard on the zipper, But it wasn't just the main compartment he was after. His teeth sank into the side seam of Prosecutor Lyle Grant's briefcase, one of those polished leather numbers that screamed authority. And with a violent jerk, he ripped through what no one had known was there, a hidden pocket. The sound was almost obscene in the silence, not loud, just real, too real. A rush of papers scattered out like a sudden gust had blown through the courtroom. A few floated up, then drifted down, white squares fluttering across the polished floor. Legal pads, typed transcripts, a manila folder marked with a red sticker, one corner bent, and then something different. A faint clink, plastic. Something small and light struck the floor and rolled in a tight half circle before coming to a stop. It was a USB drive. For a second, no one moved. Not Titan, not Grant, not the judge. Even the bailiff who'd taken a step forward froze mid-motion, hand outstretched, like reaching for a ledge that suddenly crumbled. Grant was the first to speak. "That's not evidence," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "It's mine, administrative files, backups from my prep notes, completely irrelevant to this case." He reached down, fast, too fast. The motion wasn't violent, but it was sharp, like someone trying to cover a secret with a perfectly normal gesture. The kind that always draws attention. The bailiff beat him to it. A heavy boot stepped in front of the drive, blocking it from view, and then a thick glove scooped it up before Grant's fingers could even brush the plastic. The judge's gavel didn't slam, not yet, but his voice was colder than the air conditioning humming above their heads. "Mr. Grant, that drive was not declared as part of your documentation. It was in a concealed section of your bag. Do you care to explain that?" Grant's jaw moved, but words didn't come. Not right away. When they did, they came out clipped, defensive. "It's standard to have backups. Every prosecutor does it. It's not concealed, it's just a bag." Titan had returned to a seated position beside the torn briefcase. Calm now. Focused. His tail didn't wag. His ears didn't twitch. He was still like someone watching a fire burn from a distance, already certain of what it would reveal. Michael hadn't moved from where he stood, hands loosely at his sides, eyes locked on the flash drive now in the bailiff's possession. It was small, ordinary, the kind you get in a two-pack at any drugstore. But in that moment, it pulsed with potential. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice steady but low, "you have to check what's on that drive." "We will," the judge replied without hesitation. "Court is in recess for 15 minutes. Bailiff, take the drive to the clerk's office. Have it imaged and opened under supervision. No one leaves this room until it's reviewed." Grant shifted in his seat, shoulders stiff, hands tightening into fists in his lap. The buzz in the room returned slowly, like the hum of a light bulb warming back to life. People leaned toward each other in hushed tones. The woman in the front row, who'd gasped earlier, was now clutching her handbag tighter, her eyes locked on the briefcase like it might explode. Titan stayed seated, unmoved, expression unreadable. But Michael saw it, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the way his body no longer trembled with restrained energy. He was relaxed, centered, like a soldier who just delivered a crucial message. Michael knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on the dog's thick fur. "You knew something was off," he whispered, barely audible above the stir of courtroom murmurs. "Didn't you, boy?" Titan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His work was already in motion. Grant ran a hand through his hair and shifted again in his chair. Every motion from him now seemed too sharp, too aware. The calm prosecutor from earlier had been replaced by someone less certain, someone cornered. And the court hadn't even seen what was on the drive yet. The judge stood and stepped down from the bench, signaling the clerk to follow. As he passed the prosecution table, he didn't look at Grant, not once. But he did glance down at Titan just for a moment and nodded. The gavel struck once, hard. "Recess, 15 minutes. But no one left their seats. Not really. They all wanted to see what the dog had found. The courtroom felt colder when they returned from recess. Not physically, but in the way people shifted in their seats, arms crossed tighter, shoulders drawn in. Whatever routine had lived here an hour ago was gone. This wasn't procedure anymore. This was the beginning of something else. Michael sat straighter, hands resting on the edge of the defense table, his fingers laced tightly together like they were holding something in. Titan was curled at his feet, alert but still, his head turned toward the judge's bench. The quiet between people now was sharp, electric, the kind that prickled at the base of the neck like a storm waiting to crack open the sky. The court technician stood near the front, a laptop perched on a rolling stand, its screen angled toward the judge and clerk. That flash drive was plugged in. The clerk whispered something. The judge nodded once, and then the technician clicked play. A hiss of static filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like the entire courtroom leaned forward as one. Then came the voice, not Michael's, not anyone in the room. Gruff, male, confident, but just enough to sound practiced. Pin it on Reyes. No one questions a clean cop. A beat of silence followed, and then a second voice replied, lower, harder to place. You sure about this? He's spotless. Makes him the perfect fall guy. Plant the file, use the chain of custody records, and keep the chain tight. We do this right, nobody digs. The words landed like stones in the silence, heavy, impossible to ignore. And when they stopped, when the last bit of audio crackled and faded out, the courtroom didn't breathe. For several seconds, it was like the air had vanished. Gasps were scattered, one after the other. A man in the gallery muttered something that was swallowed by the hush. The technician clicked pause, his hand trembling slightly on the mouse. The clerk looked down at the table in front of her, blinking fast as if unsure what she had just heard. Grant didn't speak. He didn't move. His face had gone pale, the kind of pale that isn't just bloodless. It's exposed, like someone stripped bare under a spotlight. His jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the USB, then to the judge, then away again. Michael didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just watched. Still, quiet. The only movement was the rise and fall of his chest, deep and controlled. Titan's ears twitched, his body pressed against Michael's leg like he was anchoring him to the floor. The judge leaned forward slowly. His gavel came down once, hard. Order, he said, though no one had made a sound. He turned to the technician. Replay that last section. The audio repeated, clearer now, familiar words with a new kind of weight. Pin it on Reyes. No one questions a clean cop. This time there were no gasps, only fury simmering behind every set of eyes. The judge turned to Lyle Grant, who hadn't moved since the audio ended. Mr. Grant, would you like to explain this? Grant blinked. Once, twice. That's not me, he said. The lie came out fast, brittle. This could be doctored, fabricated. The judge's voice cut through him like a knife. The timestamp matches this trial. The metadata shows the recording was created the day before you submitted your witness list. Don't insult this court, Mr. Grant. Grant swallowed hard. He reached for his water, but missed the glass slightly, his hand unsteady. His eyes darted toward the jury, the bench, anywhere but the dog still sitting quietly at the foot of the defense table. Titan didn't move. He didn't need to. The judge stood. Court is hereby adjourned for the day, he said, his tone now sharp, commanding. The prosecution is under immediate investigation. Mr. Grant, you are to remain on site and cooperate with federal review. Bailiffs, escort him to chambers. Grant stood only when the bailiffs closed in. His mouth opened to speak, but the words were gone. Whatever power he had held, whatever calm control he had exuded since the trial began, it evaporated under the weight of a single line of audio, a single truth. Michael stood slowly. Titan rose with him. As the bailiffs led Grant out, Michael didn't take his eyes off him. Not once. He didn't have to say a word, because Titan already had. The truth wasn't buried. It had teeth. The clatter of the gavel still echoed in Michael's ears long after the courtroom emptied. Not the sound itself, but what it had meant. Not an end. Not yet. A pause. A breath caught in the middle of what was supposed to be the final chapter. But now the ink had smudged. The page had torn. And in the jagged silence that followed, something had shifted. Two bailiffs walked behind him, not flanking, not grabbing, just present. Their posture had changed. They weren't guiding a convict anymore. They weren't rushing to secure a sentence. They were escorting a man whose verdict had stopped midair, suspended on a thread of static and truth that hadn't been planned for. Michael's wrists were free, no cuffs, no tight metal digging into his skin. That alone felt foreign. For days now, the expectation had been pain, shame, finality. Instead, there was only the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead and the weight of something unknown pressing against his spine. The holding room hadn't changed. Same pale green walls, same hard bench, but the air inside it felt different as the heavy door clicked shut behind him. Less like a cage, more like a waiting room between one life and the next. Outside, in the hallway, Titan paced slowly. Not frantic, not confused, just moving, like he was guarding the very space Michael occupied. His tail low, head steady, eyes fixed on the narrow rectangular window set into the door. He didn't blink much. He never did when he was working. Michael walked toward the glass. The fluorescent light above flickered once, humming with uneven rhythm. He placed his hand against the window and leaned his forehead to the cool metal frame. Titan stopped pacing. His eyes met Michael's. "You knew," Michael whispered, his breath fogging a faint half-circle on the glass. "You always knew." Titan didn't bark. He didn't tilt his head like some trained reaction. He just stood there unflinching, as if waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to what he'd already understood. Down the hallway, the sound of raised voices echoed faintly. Not shouting, just clipped commands, sharp with urgency. Footsteps followed, heavier than usual. Federal agents moved like a different breed. Suits that didn't wrinkle, shoes that didn't squeak, purpose trailing behind them like a second shadow. Michael stepped back from the glass, watching as two agents emerged from the stairwell, flanking Lyle Grant. One agent gripped a folder tight under his arm. The other walked just behind Grant's shoulder, close enough to remind him that freedom was now on borrowed time. Grant didn't look up. He didn't argue. His mouth was a thin, bloodless line stretched too tight across his face. His hands weren't cuffed, but they hovered near his waistband like he wanted to tuck them out of view. Like he could still pretend none of this had happened. Titan didn't move until Grant passed directly in front of the holding room window. Then and only then he let out a low growl, not loud but unmistakable. The sound cut the hallway in half. The agents didn't react. Grant flinched. Michael watched the whole thing through the glass, unmoving. Grant was escorted around the corner and disappeared. The hallway fell silent again, except for the slow tap of Titan's nails against the tile as he settled into a sit by the holding room door. Like a sentry, like a promise, Michael let his shoulders rest against the wall. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was something. The line between justice and manipulation had blurred so completely in recent weeks, he had started to doubt it ever existed. Now it was snapping back into place, one thread at a time, and Titan had been the one to pull the first. The minutes dragged, but no one came for him. No new sentence, no forced march to a transport van. Just silence, and a dog that wouldn't leave. Eventually, a clerk with nervous eyes brought a paper to the slot in the door. A printed statement, case in review, sentencing suspended, awaiting federal inquiry. Michael read it twice, then folded it slowly and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't need it. He already had what mattered. Titan, not just his partner, not just a dog, the reason the truth had clawed its way into the light. It wasn't the kind of confession that came with shouting or slamming fists on a table. It started quieter than that, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that feels rehearsed, measured breathing, a rigid jaw, eyes locked on the far wall like truth could be ignored if you didn't look directly at it. But truth doesn't work that way, and neither did the agents now sitting across from the key witness. His name was Troy Mercer, a mid-level analyst with access to the kind of records that most people wouldn't think to question. He testified 2 weeks earlier, firm and confident, swearing under oath that the chain of evidence in Michael Reyes's case had been compromised. That Reyes had signed off on altered reports, that timestamps didn't match, that the evidence trail led right back to Michael's desk. It had been clean, too clean. And now, as Mercer sat under the hum of interrogation lights in a federal holding room, the seams began to fray. Agent DeWitt leaned forward first, voice soft but firm. "We have the original files. We know they were edited. The metadata shows your login. We also have the audio." Mercer blinked. "Just once," Agent Lynn followed. "You want to keep pretending, or do you want to start explaining?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned back in the chair, exhaled through his nose like the breath had been trapped for days, and said, "I didn't have a choice." Lynn nodded slowly, the way you do when you already know the answer. "Start from the beginning." Mercer's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the water bottle on the table. The cap clicked open, the sound loud in the stillness. He took a long sip, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked down at the floor. "They came to me 6 weeks before the trial," he said. "Said they had eyes on my brother. He works a security job upstate. I don't even know what they had on him, but they showed me photos. Surveillance. Said if I didn't help them bury Reyes, they'd make sure my brother went down for gun trafficking. Said it wouldn't even be hard." DeWitt didn't blink. "Who's they?" Mercer hesitated. "Lyle Grant and a guy named Carlton. I don't know his full name. He wasn't a cop, just muscle in a suit. They were scared Reyes would reopen the cartel case. Said he didn't know when to stop digging." "What cartel case?" Lynn asked. "The one from 6 months ago. Reyes was the only one pushing to look deeper. Everyone else wrote it up as a clean raid. But there was money missing. A lot of it. And some of the property evidence never made it into the report." DeWitt exchanged a glance with Lynn. "And Reyes noticed?" Mercer nodded. "He filed a complaint. Internal review shut it down. Too fast. That's when things started going bad for him." Outside the interrogation room, the rest of the pieces had already started to move. Files were being pulled, subpoenas signed. Grant's laptop had been seized, his office emptied, and somewhere in a different part of the building, Michael Reyes sat in a quieter room, reading the typed transcript of Mercer's words. The page in his hand shook slightly. Not from fear, not even from anger. Just from the rush of knowing everything he'd been fighting against. Everything that had twisted his career, tainted his name, painted him as a traitor to the badge, was finally being unspooled by the people who had strung it together. Titan lay near the corner, his eyes half-lidded but watching. Always watching. Michael folded the transcript and placed it gently on the table. "You smelled it, didn't you?" he said quietly, almost to himself. "Back at the raid. Something that didn't belong." Titan looked up just for a moment. 6 months ago, Titan had been part of the raid that unraveled everything. Michael had thought it was just another job, another takedown. But Titan had behaved oddly, growling at the locked van out back, refusing to heel, circling Grant's SUV for minutes too long. At the time, they chalked it up to stress, noise, distraction, but now it made sense. Titan had picked up the scent of the cartel's stash, the missing cash, the hidden evidence, and that same scent had been on Grant's bag in the courtroom. The memory hadn't faded. Not for Titan. Michael stood slowly, walked across the room, and crouched beside him. His fingers curled through the thick fur just behind Titan's ears. The dog leaned in slightly. "You didn't forget," Michael whispered. And neither would he. The news broke before sunrise. Quiet at first, just murmurs among the few early risers scanning headlines on their phones. A ripple in the dark before the morning coffee brewed. But by noon it was everywhere. The sting of sirens at precincts across the city. Badge numbers being read aloud with trembling voices. Doors forced open. Arrests made not in alleyways or back rooms, but in well-lit offices with polished floors and long histories of silence. Michael watched the footage from a small screen in a federal briefing room. The volume turned low, but the message loud enough. Captain Gerald Monroe, a 20-year veteran of the force, was led out of his office in cuffs. No perp walk, no words exchanged. Just the flash of cameras and the blank stare of a man who thought the walls would hold forever. The room behind Michael was full of agents, lawyers, and caseworkers now sorting through the wreckage. What had once been a single trial had become something else entirely. An exposed root system of corruption, its branches reaching into courtrooms, narcotics units, even evidence lockers. A network that had survived for years by wearing the right uniforms and burying its secrets deep. But something they hadn't counted on. A dog with a memory stronger than any file, and a man who refused to break, even when the world turned on him. Michael sat still, the collar of his shirt damp where the tension had been resting for too long. His hands were loose now, not clenched. No restraints, no holding cells, no shadow of a sentence hanging overhead. Titan sat beside him, not lying down this time, but upright and alert. Like he knew this part wasn't over yet. Like he understood the final step in clearing a name wasn't just proving innocence. It was standing in the light afterward and letting people see the truth. "Detective Reyes," a voice called from the door. Michael turned. A federal agent with sharp eyes and a crisp suit stood waiting. "They're ready for you in the courtroom." Michael rose. No escort this time. No bailiffs shadowing his steps. Just him and Titan walking through the quiet hallway, the echo of their footsteps a strange comfort. The courtroom was full again, but not the way it had been before. This wasn't tension. It was curiosity. It was relief. It was something close to reverence. Reporters lined the back, their pens still for once. Former colleagues filled the benches, their badges resting heavier today. Some wore guilt on their faces, others wore awe. And in the far corner, a few of the jury members who had once voted guilty now sat with their heads lowered, unsure how to reconcile what they'd been told with what they now knew. Michael stepped forward toward the defense table, but the judge waved him past it. "Detective Reyes," the judge said, voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "You are no longer here as a defendant. You are here to be cleared publicly and in full view of those who should have stood beside you all along." Michael nodded once, words not necessary. He rested a hand gently on Titan's back. The judge continued. "In light of new evidence, including audio recordings, federal testimony, and internal confessions, the court fully exonerates you of all charges. Your record will be restored, and your service will be remembered the way it deserves." Applause wasn't protocol in a courtroom, but it came anyway. Soft at first, a few hands in the back, then more, then all of it. Michael didn't smile. He just turned toward Titan, who was sitting tall now, his ears forward, eyes scanning the room like a soldier taking final stock of the mission's end. "You brought us home," Michael whispered to him. "You never stopped working." Someone approached from the gallery, a young officer, uniform fresh, eyes wide. She crouched and reached a hand toward Titan, then paused. "Is it okay?" she asked Michael. He nodded. She stroked behind Titan's ear gently. "You saved him, didn't you?" Titan didn't move, but he didn't need to. He'd already spoken in the only language that ever mattered, one of loyalty, of instinct, of truth. And today that truth had filled a courtroom not with fear, but with justice. The courthouse doors swung open with a creak that sounded far too quiet for what had just happened inside. Sunlight poured across the marble steps, blinding after so many weeks of fluorescent bulbs and cold gray walls. Michael paused just inside the threshold, one foot still within the shadow of the courtroom that had nearly swallowed him whole. For a moment, the noise of the outside world didn't exist. Just the hum of relief in his chest and the steady presence at his side. Titan stepped forward first, tail low but wagging, nose in the air like he was already scanning the scene. Even now, out in the open, surrounded by camera shutters and microphones, he remained in work mode, the kind of alertness that couldn't be turned off. Michael followed, blinking against the light, the gravity of his freedom not hitting all at once but unfolding slowly. Each step down the stairs, another weight lifted. The reporters were waiting. A wall of lenses, questions, voices raised over one another in a race to get the quote, to capture the headline. "Detective Reyes, how does it feel to be a free man? What are your thoughts on the arrest of Captain Monroe? Do you plan to sue the department for wrongful prosecution?" He didn't answer. Not with words. He walked until he reached the last step and then stopped, letting Titan sit beside him. The crowd hushed slightly, maybe from expectation, maybe because they sensed that this wasn't the moment to chase a soundbite. Michael turned to Titan, crouched low to meet him eye to eye, and placed a hand gently under the dog's chin. Titan leaned into the touch, not with excitement, but with understanding. The kind of mutual stillness that only comes from surviving something together. "You didn't just save me," Michael whispered, his voice rough and barely audible above the distant whir of news drones overhead. "You saved everything." Titan blinked slowly, his ears tilting forward just slightly, like he was listening even to the things that couldn't be said out loud. That the real trial hadn't been about evidence or testimony or verdicts. It had been about faith, who you trust when the system doesn't, who shows up when the world turns its back. They stood there for a while, the two of them, before continuing down the sidewalk, past the crowd, past the parked vans and security tape, past the whispers and apologies and words that no longer mattered. Michael didn't look back, not at the courthouse, not at the people who doubted him. He only looked forward, and every so often, down at Titan, who paced beside him in perfect sync, his head held high. The precinct was quiet when they arrived, most of the desks empty, the lights dimmed. A few officers were still there, working silently, their faces tight with the weight of what had come to light. One or two nodded at Michael as he passed. One even stood, hand clenched at his side, unsure if he should say something. Michael offered a nod back. Nothing more. There would be time for reckoning later. He reached his old locker, untouched since the day he was suspended. The nameplate still crooked, the scratches in the paint still catching the light the same way they used to. He opened it slowly, expecting dust and silence, but finding something else. A framed photo tucked on the top shelf. Him and Titan, taken years ago after their first big case. Both younger, both cleaner, both unaware of how complicated justice could become. He picked it up and stared for a long time. Later that night, Michael sat on his front porch, the air cool, the sky painted in streaks of dusk. Titan lay at his feet, his head resting on the top step. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a siren cried out, faint and fading. "You always knew," Michael murmured again, running a hand through Titan's fur. "Even when I didn't. You never stopped looking." Titan didn't move, but Michael felt the warmth of him there, steady and true. Not just a partner in uniform, not just a dog. He was the reason the story had changed, the reason the lie didn't win. Because sometimes the system forgets what loyalty means, what instinct can uncover, what trust, when it's real, can reveal. But a dog doesn't forget, and neither would Michael. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of truth and loyalty, make sure to subscribe. These are the stories we tell, of justice, of hope, and of the silent heroes who never let go. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe in the power of loyalty, the courage to stand against injustice, and the silent strength of those who can't speak but still tell the truth, then don't let this be the end. Subscribe to the channel and join us for more true-hearted tales that shine a light where the world needs it most. Your support helps us share stories that matter.